Today I have a pattern hack to share with you. It's a pattern I've already made that you've already seen, but another strike of creativity for you. Sneak peek, neckties. Stay tuned. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina. This is Lifting Pins and Needles, a channel all about sewing, limitless sewing, and not enough cuts. Actually, look at them, they're growing by leaps and bounds. We'll let them go. In this channel, I talk all about sewing, including super practical aspects of sewing footage that you can see up close to see exactly how things are made, and the thought of, with my voice behind the reasoning behind things that I do. So if you're into sewing, you will find a lot of that here. So if you like the video while you watch, you could consider subscribing, tapping on the bell to get all the notifications so you don't miss when a video goes live. Thank you so much for your lovely comments on the last couple of videos. This is my laundry day tee. I've shown how to sew this V-neck band. If you've missed out, you can go back and look at that. It's a free pattern by Love Notions that was relaunched, including extra sizing and a full bust option, and it was just generally redrafted, the whole thing, the sleeve, the shoulders, everything. It's raining, it's windy, I am under a roof. You probably won't see the rain. I hope you can't hear the wind. I had to buy an emergency cardigan because even though we're in summer, this is the south of Chile, and sometimes you get cold and rain as well as sunny days. Today I have a dress to share with you. It's a pattern you have already seen before, and I don't get bored of repeating patterns because I never make them exactly the same. I will usually make them like the original version is intended the first time or the second, but then that's when the fun starts for me, and that's when I think how I can make little changes to create different looks with a pattern I already know fits me. And someone commented on my last video of the 2019 roundups that they noticed that I would repeat a pattern and just change things, releasing some time for sewing. And that is absolutely true. Every time you choose a pattern that you've never made before, there's a whole process of fitting it, of checking things, of maybe making a toile, and it is time intensive. Now when you have limited time to sew, you can go back to the patterns that you already know, love, and that fit you, to make little changes and just have really special projects that reflect your personality and your artsy side. I consider sewing an art. For me, it is an art form, the way I express what I like visually in the form of fabric and shapes, So what do I have today is a Rhapsody dress. Now I know I've shared one a few weeks ago that was more of a winter style. If you haven't seen that video, you can check it out. I'll put a picture here if you haven't seen. I basically just modified the way the neckline was constructed. I didn't modify pattern pieces or anything, and it's sort of similar to what I'm going to show you now, but not similar at all. So I would say this is a part 2 of that dress hack, because there are things that I've shown there on that video that I didn't show in this, and vice versa. In the last video, I basically showed how I drafted a large facing, how I had a clean neckline there, all finished without any spice binding that the original pattern had, and that was because the fabric was thick. I didn't really think the bias binding was appropriate for that thick crepe. So this time I have something similar. I have drafted a facing again, but a smaller one, because I do want that neckline to be raw, to be finished at the top, not with bias binding, but with a long tie. Let's call it a necktie. Let's call it a big long bow that goes around your neckline. So there are patterns that are intended to have this type of bow, and they're drafted that way, and they can be constructed in all different sorts of complicated ways. I have made a simplicity pattern. I'll put a picture here in 2018 that had a similar sort of thing going on, and I showed all the construction there. Going back now, I think that way of constructing can be a little bit complicated, a bit confusing, although it's really clear in my head. I'm always looking for ways to show you things in a more simple way so that you can also have access to these visual things that you might want to do but find a bit confusing. So I wanted this, and I'm going to show you how to do that, and that is coming up now.
You
This is the front of the blouse, and I've cut out my bust circle. I figured that out by trying on another blouse I'd made. It's hard to determine by flat measuring because this is a piece that is attached to a yoke that comes over on the front. So this is not a shoulder seam, so I can't measure from here down. So I just tried on a Rhapsody blouse I've already made, and putting it on myself, I just marked with chalk where my bust was, and then got that blouse, put it on here, and determined that that was the circle. The prints I'm using have all sorts of prints, and I don't want them to end up being right there, you know. For the hack with the neckties, I've just drafted by eye. I just eyeballed this little curve, and it's going to be a little facing that is going to finish this tiny little V there. In the original pattern, this little V is finished with bias binding, and then the neckline is finished with bias binding, like little ties here. Well, I want to finish this with a facing so that that V is nice and clean, and on this neck line here will come a thicker tie, like a necktie, just wider, you know. So after eyeballing and drawing that curve there, I transferred it onto another piece of paper so I can actually cut this out from, you know, fabric. So from the V right there, that line there is 2.5 inches lower, and then across from the middle of this V to there is 3 inches, and from that point there up the neckline is 2.5. So if you measure that and draw points and then just draw a curve, you'll be fine. But actually this facing can totally be eyeballed. You don't need a specific, you know, size. I just want it to be medium sized. I don't want a huge thing, or I don't want a tiny thing. I think this is fine. This is the front. This is the tiny facing that is just gonna make this V really nice and crisp while leaving the neckline raw, because that's gonna be finished with a tie. So that's been interfaced and serged on the edge, and then I hand basted it on, and that yellow dot there is for me to pivot at that point. I'm going to sew this on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. They're pivoting there and up, and then clip and understitch. The same that I do with any neckline, only this is a tiny one. I've sewn the facing, clipped it in there, turned it around, there's understitching right there, and I've pressed it really flat. And now I've just hand basted that on there, and I'm going to top stitch this down so this facing doesn't move anywhere. I'm going to use the edge of where I serged as a guide, and I'll try to sew right around right there to keep it straight. Then having this done, I can just keep going with this until I get to the neckline bit when I attach the ties. I'm adding on the yoke to the front. Now this is where I've just done the neckline, right? And that piece there was super wide, being gathered to match the width of the yoke here. And that's on both sides. My 2 yoke pieces are cut from different fabrics. I always use a lining one. It is inside, you're not going to see it, and it's a waste of your main fabric to use it. So I have this navy viscose, and the yoke that's going to be visible is over there at the back, right sides together with the front. There, right sides together, and over here is the wrong side, and I have my lining there. So both yoke pieces, my lining yoke made out of viscose and my main yoke made out of the main fabric, are sandwiching that gathered bit there from the front piece, and that's on both sides. And now when you sew that together, that's going to give you a really clean finish inside. I was careful to make the gathers nice and even here in there but you can't see them now. And I'm just going to sew this with a 3/8 seam allowance. Now the other side. After sewing that little seam, this is how the neckline looks. The V there that I have a facing there. Then comes this gathered bit that is gathered into both these yoke pieces, the main one and the lining one that's behind. And you can see there's no seam or anything raw there because it's all in there. And that's the same there on that side. And now you have this long piece here. These are the 2 yokes that need to be attached to the back. They will also be enclosed, just in a different way. Now this is the top of the back piece that's going to go into this yoke there. And there are 2 marks there to form a box pleat, and I always prefer to gather that. It's the same thing, you're just getting rid of the same amount of volume to fit into this yoke, only I do gathers because I think it's nicer, because there are gathers on the front, I want gathers at the back. Now the way I'm going to put all this together, you've already seen it in the other dress, so I'm not going to film that. For the neckties, I'm going to have to piece the length that I want. A good length is about 2 yards maybe, so you probably have to piece it in the middle anyway. It's really hard to get that length in a continuous thing, you know. But I had to piece it in 3, so these 3 are like 23.5 inches long, and I just got this from a little piece left over from the fabric, and they are 4 inches wide. The print is busy, so my seams won't be seen on the ties. When you actually sew this and fold this in half, the tie ends up being about 1.5 inches wide. You can see there on the cutting mat, you can see right there 1.5 inches right there, and then the rest up there is seam allowance, 3/8 on the top and on the bottom. And that is the width I like in ties, not too narrow, not too wide. And that's it really, no special drafting, just a rectangle that's 4 inches wide by length, whatever, you know. This is the neckline. Here's that little V that has been finished with that little facing there. And the yoke, everything's been done. Now the neckline has been stay stitched so it doesn't stretch out. And what I've done with the ties is just find the middle of the tie. There's a line there because I marked it by pressing it. So that's the middle that I matched to the middle of the neckline, and then I just kept pinning until I got to here where the little V is, and I marked from there about 3/4 inch further than there with chalk, and I did the same here on the other side. So that's been pinned 3/8 inch all around the neckline, and I just wanted to know up to what point I needed to mark. Now I'm going to unpin this, just take it all off. So I've taken the tie off the neckline. I just took all those pins out. There is the middle there of the tie that you can tell by that crease mark. This is one of the chalk marks up to where the V reaches on one side, and on the other side it's there. So now I'm just going to fold this tie lengthwise like that, right sides together. Okay, so this whole tie is folded onto itself, right sides together for the whole length from here, and it's falling down that way. This is the chalk mark on one side, and that's the reference. So basically I need to sew this closed, sew that, come up here, just up to there, leave that all open. And on the other side I have the other chalk mark there where I'm gonna start sewing there, reinforce, sew that, and then close that end. And then there'll be a whole section that is open like that, and that'll be to put on the neckline. I'm starting at one of the ends of the ties, and I'm just gonna like close that and then start that way. There is the chalk mark there, so that's where I stop. Now I have a large section here that will be left open. That's where the neckline goes, and here is the next chalk mark there, and this is where I need to close the other end of the tie. You can see there's an open area all in the center of the tie, and then to the extremes it's been closed, and this just needs to be flipped. I have the whole tie here on the pressing board, and I've pressed it. Where you see the pen there is where the tie has been closed, and where the other pen is where it's been closed on the other side, and all this middle bit is open. But I have pressed it in like both sides, 3/8 inch has been pressed in. So it's like it's been sewn, it looks like it has been sewn, but it's actually open like that. This pin there marks the center of the whole tie, and that will match the center back of the top. And now all this open bit is gonna have the neckline inside it. So I'm gonna go take this to the neckline and start pinning from the center towards the V neckline, and it'll stop around there, and then it will just be ties. And the same to the other side. This is my dress. I've got it turned right sides out like that. This is the internal yoke, the one that's made out of viscose. That pin marks the center of the back. That pin marks the center of the ties. And I'm just going to slide the dress into there like that. and start pinning. And so I want to make sure I'm only getting about 3/8 of an inch inside both sides, and I'm pinning. This is a shortcut way to do it. Other ties I've done by sewing this side first, so putting the tie on the back right sides together, sewing that, and then flipping this and then sewing this on. But I think this is a shorter way that can still work, just being careful with pinning. So these two always need to match, and this one just needs to go in there a little bit, there, and then that needs to keep going until I reach the point there of the V, and that's where the tie that's already been sewn will start there. I have attached the tie to half of the neckline. There's the center back there, and you can see the pins there catching both sides of the tie, and the neckline is sandwiched in there, and it goes all along the edge until the V. So this is the V neckline on the front, and that's going to have the ties coming up from there. And now all this bit is still flapping around the other half of the neckline towards this V right there, and then I'm going to do that now. The tie has been all pinned to the neckline. You can see the neckline there has the tie. There's the V neckline, little tiny V at the front with both ties. And now what I'm going to do is hand baste that on. I don't trust all these pins to hold this in place properly while I sew, so I'll just hand sew that hand baste. It's not a large piece to hand baste, and it's totally worth it. This has been hand basted on, and now with an edge foot I'm going to sew that down, and then the ties will be done, and so will the dress, because I've done everything else. I'm starting on the left side, so this is the left side of the blouse, you know, and I've got my edge foot there with the needle to the left. The tie was still open like up to there, so I'm starting a little beyond where the V starts, and then just keep going. And that's the end right there, that's the V, and I'm gonna sew like 3/8 of an inch further. And I leave long threads. I don't like to back tack. I'll just secure that invisibly by pulling a thread to the other side and doing a little knot. And that's it. Remove the basting stitches, and that's... This is the dress. The wind is blowing it everywhere. This is a bubble crepe that was sent to me by Minerva.com in exchange for a blog post. It's the normal bubble crepe you will see in many places, you know, and it's got lovely print and lovely color. Not much more to say about the fabric, that it was just really easy to work with and press, and that made the construction of the necktie and that large area I left open and just pressed in easy to manipulate and sew. So that is a good thing about this type of fabric. Bubble crepe, really easy to work with. It has a really nice drape, and it's not a lightweight fabric. I would say it's a medium weight fabric, makes it appropriate for this. Not totally sheer or anything like that. The other dress I made, the winter one, I mentioned that if I put a belt on it, if I wanted a different look, the hem would come up considerably and I'd end up with a really short dress. Well, I took the precaution of adding an inch to this one because I knew I wanted to wear a belt with it. It is very loose and very flowy, and there might be days where I just want to look a bit more put together and have a belt on. Other days I would just wear it loose because, you know, I'm very moody in the way I feel and the way I dress myself. And I have someone here annoying me. She just climbed up my leg, you know. You saw I mentioned I like a necktie to be about 2 yards long, or 180 centimeters. So that is the length there, like the whole length of the tie. You need to put one seam at least on the center back, depending on how you're cutting it. In this case, I had to have 2 seams, but because it's a busy print, you can't see. Okay, the back has a yoke that's lined. I used a scrap of a navy rayon to line that, to not use the main fabric, and all the gathers there underneath are enclosed. I showed exactly how to do this in the video of the other dress, the one that I've talked about before, so that you can see there. On the front, this yoke comes over to the front and encloses this seam there from the front. So all this gathering there is enclosed within the yoke. Super neat there. And this I did show you on this video, you know. If you would have done the bias binding as per the original pattern, you would have attached in the same way. It's just that I did a big, long, wider bow that is not on the bias, you know. On the front, maybe you can see the little facing that we have here that I did sew down to not have it flapping around. It is a small facing, and on the right side of the dress it has been sewn down that you can't see because of the print, you know. You can't really see the blue stitching line. Bias binding at the sleeveless armholes. I've hemmed with bias tape as usual, nothing different there. The hem stays curved as always, and I have a clip of me wearing it that I filmed before coming over to Chile. So I'm back home in Brazil in the past to show you how it fits. Here is my Rhapsody dress. I have it on with a belt just to give it a bit more shaping. If I just take the belt off, it's a bit loose, but that's fine. These are the ties, the curved hem. Now I did lengthen the hem by an inch compared to the other dress because I knew I wanted to wear this with a belt. Usually when you put a belt on, the hem just goes up a little bit because you get this blousing effect sort of thing there. So I didn't want to end up with a really short dress, you know. So I'm super happy with it. Now up closer you can see the neckline there, how this adds shaping. Now if I take the belt off, it's just, and you know, there's a day I might just want to wear it like this as well, but I wanted to have the option of a belt, and that's why I made the dress a little bit longer. So up at the top you have that little V neckline there that I used a facing to finish inside, and then from there come the neckties that are 1.5 inches wide around that. And I didn't make them excessively long because I don't really like a long tie. I think the tie tied up like that is perfect. And if I did a little bow, it would just be there. And I like that. I like how that looks a lot. This is just an alternative because you could have done this same thing but done the V with bias tape and then the neckline with bias tape, self-made like it's instructed in the pattern. This is just another way of finishing it here to make it a little bit different. Here you can see the yoke with the little gathers there. Inside I have 2 layers, of course, I've shown you that, with rayon, and I have the gathered little bit there instead of a pleat because I like that gather to match this gather there. I hope you enjoyed this video, just giving you another option for this really versatile pattern. This pattern already has a ton of options. I just like to think up, you know, a few more, and I really wanted to add a tie. You know, I like the look of that. I think it's really feminine and elegant. I just like it, so I wanted to share it with you. Don't forget, tonight is the end of the site-wide sale for Love Notions, 30% off. If you've been waiting to get a few patterns, go have a look. I have an affiliate link down below in the description box. At no cost to you, I make a small commission if you buy through that link, and that helps support me. I will see you soon with another sewing video. Have fun sewing. Bye.